very special. Pastor Don will be here momentarily to welcome you and to welcome the webinar audience and to introduce our first speaker. We will begin. The speakers will hand off from one to the other so we can get everybody in the hour and 15 minutes. And the webinar, just so you know, people are sitting at home right now looking at a screen knowing we're about to start. And we really appreciate you being here as well. Pastor Don?
Welcome. We are certainly glad that you have joined us. I'm okay. We're glad that you've joined us for this very important event. We want to welcome those of you who are in the audience this afternoon, and we also want to welcome those of you who are watching via your computers. We're glad that you've joined us. Again, this is a very significant afternoon. We're going to be dealing with critical issues in the United States of America today. We want to let you know that there are going to be no questions during this webinar. The webinar is going to go till about 3:15, and then we're going to have a little bit of a break. The webinar will then be canceled. We're going to have a break. We're going to have some refreshments, and then we are going to come back and field questions from the audience. The theme for this afternoon is, will we allow America or Michigan to transform America? And we're going to be dealing with this theme from a number of different angles. And I have the distinct privilege. I never had the opportunity until just a moment ago to say hello to Frank Gaffney, but I have his book, one of his books, War Footing, in my home, and I've found that book to be tremendous, tremendously informative, tremendously instructive, and Frank is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. That's just one of the things that he is. He was a senior advisor in the Reagan administration. Frank understands Islam. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank understands Islam. And without any further ado, I'm going to invite him forward this afternoon.
We on?
We on now, for sure. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Pastor Don. He acknowledged to me a moment ago that he not only had my book in his home, he had my book in his washroom. And I tried to take that in the best possible way, but I'm not sure what that is. Anyway, we're delighted to be here in your home, Pastor, and thank you for opening it to this really important topic. I'm honored to be here in the company of patriots and to be, I'm hoping, able to shed a little bit of light on the problem that we're facing along with them for the purpose of trying to help you help the rest of us do something about it. The pastor was also kind enough to show you a couple of my first slides, so I'll just move quickly through those. My old boss, Ronald Reagan, had this famous line, and I live by it. Our generation, like everyone before, has to fight for freedom. And we're in the midst of a fight that is existential, truly, and if we don't prevail in it, the effects will be very bad for our country, of course, but for our children, our loved ones as well. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that threat, that existential threat. The most immediate, I believe, is best described as Sharia. What is Sharia? It is a term that you may have heard, having hung around these circles, you probably have. It is, in part, a religious practice, a code that directs how one prays, in which direction one prays, what one prays about if you are of the Muslim faith. The problem is that there's kind of a veneer of religiosity, and underneath it is what really is a totalitarian, political, military, and legal program that is intended to govern all aspects of a Muslim's life. You're going to hear this afternoon from two women who have lived as Muslims, have lived under Sharia. They will tell you chilling stories from their personal experiences of what that's like. It should not be lost on any of us that it is not only not something that we want to do, want to subject ourselves to, but it is not something that is consistent with our Constitution, our values, our civilization. I showed you this a moment ago inadvertently. This is a man who does not embrace Sharia as part of his practice of Islam. He calls it political Islam. Zuhdi Jasser is one of, I believe, many Muslims, but one of very few who are willing to speak about this, to let alone express this thought that Sharia is actually man-made law, which is, of course, considered to be apostasy by those who think it's all divinely inspired, which is these guys, of whom there are a lot. The exact numbers, anybody's guess, but hundreds of millions around the world is a safe bet. And it turns out, as we've seen on our own shores, notably, but not exclusively on 9/11, it doesn't take many for this to be a problem. This is the single most important point I'm going to communicate to you, and that is that this program, properly understood, is a totalitarian ideology incompatible with, as I said, our form of government and way of life, and we have the duty, as well as legal bases, for protecting ourselves against it. If we misunderstand it, and there are many who insist that we must understand it differently, that it is a religion, and therefore it must be protected under our Constitution, well, we're doomed if we accept that. Because it requires of its adherents jihad, to impose it on the entire world, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, by the way. Here's an obvious form of the jihad. You've seen it in Europe, these boats of people coming ashore, bringing with them Sharia supremacism. Not all of them, but many of them. And in the process, combined with the effects of a demographic form of jihad, which is to say outbreeding the native population, fundamentally transforming those societies. The evidence is now too widespread to ignore, though a concerted effort has been made over there, and here for that matter, to ignore it. I want to hone in on this last point, though. In addition to the violent kind of jihad, which we're all familiar with, of course, and this demographic jihad and financial jihad, which we could talk about in Q&A if you're interested, there is this, what I call pre-violent jihad, or civilization jihad, which is explained to us in this document. It's called the Explanatory Memorandum. It's available for free online. I don't know if we have it here or not, but we have it available at securefreedom.org. You can download it. Very short, not terribly elegant prose, frankly, but it is very clear in its message. It's written by a top Muslim Brotherhood operative. It was a secret plan to explain to the mothership, the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood back in Egypt, in 1991, what the Sharia supremacists of the Brotherhood were doing in our country, had been doing at that point for about 25 years, and have been doing assiduously ever since this report was written, some 27 years ago. So think about it. For over 55 years, 56 years, we have had in our country people pursuing this mission. Yep. I'm working from different slide decks. The mission is this: destroying Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning ours, and the hands of the believers, so that God's or Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. This is what we're up against in our own country. And the leading edge of it is an effort to suppress people like us having conversations like this with people like you. These are two groups, in addition to the Brotherhood. Another one, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. You may never have heard of it, but it is a very, very important multinational organization championing this idea that it is offensive to Islam to say any of the things that I'm saying to you, which means that that is a capital offense, and that governments around the world must suppress it. Think about it. Your free speech over the side. And look who's helping them do it. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which insists that people like us are haters and racists and bigots, Islamophobes. The Anti-Defamation League, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the European Union. These are all elements of the left, I would say, that are making common cause with the Islamists in what I think of as the red-green axis, to try, among other things, to suppress your situational awareness. Because that's the greatest threat to a subversive, stealthy civilization jihad, as the Brotherhood calls it. If you know what's going on and don't want your country to succumb to it, that's a problem for the Islamists, for the Sharia supremacists. So they are very anxious to make sure you don't know about it. Here are 4 people that they spend an awful lot of time trying to vilify, just in the national security space. Of course, you know the president, John Bolton, his national security advisor, Mike Pompeo, his new Secretary of State. Man you probably don't know is the man on the end. You may have seen him a lot on Fox, but don't know as much about him, certainly. His name is Fred Fleitz. He was, until about a month ago, the senior vice president of my organization, the Center for Security Policy. And when John Bolton asked him to come over and become the chief of staff of the National Security Council, the red-green axis went after him, partly to go after us, to be honest, but to go after him as well, as a racist, hater, bigot, and so on. Nothing could be farther from the truth, but it is part and parcel of this campaign to suppress good people trying to protect our country against the sorts of threats that Ronald Reagan talked about that are truly existential. Europe is beginning to respond, finally, in bits and pieces in various places to a greater degree than others, but notably just in the past 10 days or so, the chancellor, new chancellor of Austria, has taken steps there on the right. He's actually shut down 7 mosques. He is expelling imams associated with those mosques who are Sharia supremacists. He is banning groups that are promoting this sort of thing from Muslim Brotherhood-like operations. And he is banning foreign funding of those who are office holders in religious lines of work. Other European nations have stopped the flow of migrants. And there is even some talk that the European Union will agree to create some other place for these migrants to go before they come to Europe for processing or for presumably not processing, as the case may be. And I just want to call your attention to this quote from Chancellor Kurz. Parallel societies, political Islam and radicalization have no place in our country. That is precisely the point, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that people aren't allowed to practice their faith, as long as their faith is not going to separate them from the rest of us and create a toxic threat to the rest of us. So I'm going to try to address quickly what President Trump, as a candidate, said he wanted to do about this toxic ideology. This is a speech that he made in Youngstown, Ohio, on the 15th of August, 2016. It had these elements. He talked specifically about the enemy as radical Islam or radical Islamic terrorism. He mentioned explicitly its ideological underpinnings. He called it Sharia. He called for a comprehensive counter-ideological strategy for defeating it. He said we're going to stop importing jihadists. My words, not his, but that was the idea. Sensible, isn't it? Whatever number we have, it's plenty, don't you think? And then he said, we're going to do something about the networks that are radicalizing in our communities. Those are, ladies and gentlemen, the Muslim Brotherhood and similar Sharia supremacist groups. These are the sorts of things we need done in America as much as in Europe. We need to help him do that in the following ways. We have to be clear about all of the aspects of jihad, not just the violent kind. We need to be working at strategically and comprehensively countering it, operationalizing, in other words, the strategy that he enunciated in August of 2016. And for that to happen, ladies and gentlemen, we need your strong and sustained support. We need to create conditions in which that is expected of officials who take an oath, as I did, to protect our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So some specific ideas about what you can do to help. You personally can do to help. Learn about this. Others will talk to you in different ways about this. My view of this is, if you call it Sharia supremacism, we can address the crux of the problem without it being described as a religion we have to respect. It is a political totalitarian ideology. Learn about what we need to do to stop it. There are great resources in this room today. Sharia and other books that we've written, Sharia, The Threat to America, are available for you for free. Again, downloadable at securefreedom.org. Phil Haney has a terrific book he'll be talking about here momentarily. Learn what we have to do to protect ourselves. This is self-serving, I admit it, but if you can't think of anything that you personally would like to do, help those of us who are in the fight. We take cash. Join us if you can. We will show you other things you can do, including, for example, educating the people who are not in this room about the sorts of things we're talking with you about. It's not comfortable sometimes. You may have found this particularly with your own family members. You still need to do it. It's part of defending our country, and that's part of your job. Your elected representatives need to hear from you if you are concerned about this. As was mentioned a moment ago, there is, I'm told, a political election coming up here shortly. This may have come to your attention, not just here in Michigan, but of course across the country. For at least the next 5 months, you will be surprised at how interested actual elected officials and would-be elected officials are in your thoughts. That may fall off sharply after November, but for the next 5 months, you've got their attention. Take advantage of it. Urge, respectfully, the media to cover these issues. It is not acceptable for them to consider themselves part of the enforcement of the Sharia supremacist silencing of conversation about these issues. Work to make sure that your children are not propagandized about it in school. This is a hugely important piece of the overall problem. It's not the only problem we have, needless to say, with our educational system, but it is one of them. Your engaging to contest it will go a long way to helping counter what your kids are getting fed. And finally, do what we're doing here today. Join us in exercising your freedom of speech. This is like a muscle, folks. It atrophies if it isn't used, especially in the face of the efforts to take it away from all of us. So with that, let me just conclude by one quick message, and I know I'm over time. I've been asked to share with you something about the persecution of Christians. And I won't do justice to it right now, but I'll just go through a couple of things very quickly. 50 years ago, an effort was made to save Soviet Jews. You may be familiar with that. It started with signs. It turned into a movement. The movement turned into political leverage. This is an image of an old boss of mine, Senator Henry M. Scoop Jackson. Scoop Jackson said to the Soviet Union through legislation, you won't get something they desperately needed, most favored nation status, unless you let the Jews out and others who wanted to go. They refused to do it. They didn't get the most favored nation status and all that flowed from it. Ronald Reagan came along, and without that financial safety net, he was able to use economic warfare to take down the Soviet Union. In the process, freeing not only millions of Jews, but hundreds of millions of other people. That's a miracle, ladies and gentlemen, and a friend of mine said it started with a few. There we go. Better? Sorry. My bad. So this time around, again, the threat in our time, Christians are being persecuted massively. By some estimates, 215 million Christians are being heavily persecuted. We need to understand that threat is existing and going on and needs to be stopped. There are great people working on helping these people symptomatically, feeding them, sheltering, clothing, you name it. It's not enough. More needs to be done. We believe that a campaign that begins with signs in our time, signs like this, to save the persecuted Christians, with that nun symbol in the center as a sign of the repression of Christians. It comes from what the Islamic State painted on the doors of Christian homes as they were rousting out the inhabitants for the purposes of doing to them the sorts of things I just showed you, oftentimes just murdering them. This is a moment when we can do something that I believe will create a movement. These are examples of churches and other places around the country that have begun displaying the sign. You can get this for free as well. Help us with social media platforms and otherwise to hold accountable those in our time who are doing this kind of persecuting. With that, I will conclude and simply say thank you for your attention and time, and thank you for the wonderful people who are here, including Farah Prudence. Prudence? Is that right? I've just met her. She's a fabulous woman, a former Muslim who has, again, experienced firsthand the sorts of threats that we're talking about, and I give her to you to tell her story. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right. This is up there. Thank you. Always like to start this way. Thanks. Thanks is a word that means shukran in Arabic. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today. It takes a lot of courage to actually show up today, which is kind of a sad thing. I would hope that it wouldn't take courage to come up and listen to what other people are saying. Thanks to everybody who organized this, my fellow speakers who have an amazing spirit to stand here against the tide of mainstream media and mainstream thinking to try and save our country. Thank you to my security team for volunteering their time and skills. And most importantly, many thanks to Christ, my Lord and Savior, for my calling, for his grace, and for giving me the opportunity to come in here and share it with you. And thanks to my husband for allowing me to be here today, because he's an amazing man. Today, I want to talk to you about words, because words are important. And we're told today that words are not important. It depends on what you identify them as or how you define them. But words are important. The first word after thanks is freedom. I was born free to a non-practicing Muslim father and a Rum Orthodox mother in Ohio. So I was born an American citizen by the grace of God. Captivity. Captivity in Arabic means asr. Isolated, alone, and ignorant of American rights, my mother converted to Islam when I was 5 under the threat of having her children taken away by her fairy tale loving husband, the non-practicing Muslim man. By denying Christ 3 times in front of a mosque in Florida, she actually signed herself and her 4 children to captivity. At 6 years old, my father moved us to the Middle East. Nobody asked any questions here, and there's nothing they could do to save American children from being transported overseas. I lived in Jordan for 6 years and the United Arab Emirates for 4. There I endured physical, emotional, mental, spiritual abuse from my father. I also endured sexual abuse from my father's brother as well as his uncle. My father knew well what was going on. I told him word for word everything that was going on. He did nothing, and in a minute you'll understand why. I witnessed the brutal abuse of my mother that was happening all the time, and we couldn't get any help from any judges or police or law enforcement. I'm going to share a little story with you that you can actually find in a book my mom wrote about her life. It's called Frozen Tears. I have a few of them here. It's a great book. It talks about this phenomena has taken over, nobody's talking about, of losing our daughters, of Christian, Jewish, atheist, non-Muslim women marrying into Islam in this fairy tale, forbidden love story, and it almost always ends in disaster. So, my father had physically abused my mother on the first day of Ramadan. We're in Ramadan right now, just in case you're wondering. And there are a lot of people that are keeping toll of all of the attacks that are happening because of Sharia, of course. So I was raised Sunni Muslim, and in Sunni Islam, which is the majority of Muslims in the world follow Sunni Islam, over 70%, you are not allowed to beat your wife on the face. My dad did. My mom went to the sheikh, and the sheikh is like a pastor, only his first 2 duties are not religious. The first 2 duties of the sheikh or the imam are political and civil. Family matters, marriage, divorce, stoning your daughter for not wearing a hijab, such things. Political, war, jihad, civilization or otherwise. And my mom went to the sheikh. The sheikh was irate. He told his guard to go get my dad, and if he won't come, drag him by the ear. My dad came. He says, "How could you do this to your wife on the first day of Ramadan?" He says, "Ya Sidi, Ya Sheikh. She's a Christian convert, and she cursed Allah on the first day of Ramadan." That was all, folks. The sheikh looked at my mother and said, go home. There's nothing I could do for you. Why? Well, you'll find out here soon. Love. It means hub. Something that we as Christians take for granted from our faith, from our God and from our Christ. When you look at the Quran and you look at Islam, the concept of grace is not available at all. It's nowhere to be seen. Neither is the concept of love. Look at that. And I wanted my father's love. So at 10 years old, I decided to become a devout Muslim. I decided to, read the Quran, study the Sunnah and the Seerah, which are all about the life of Muhammad. That's who Muslims are supposed to emulate and follow 100%. And I started to wear the hijab, which is the headscarf. And I actually started to get physically ill. My hair was falling out. I was running fevers, night sweats, nightmares, because of what I found. What I found is in Quran chapter 65 verse 4, Surah 65, it says, if you have doubt about your wives who have ceased to menstruate, then prescribed period is 3 months. The length of time is also prescribed for young girls or wives who have not yet menstruated. It is halal, allowed, and according to the Sunnah and the Seerah, it is encouraged, because Muhammad did it, to marry young girls who have not yet hit puberty. Muhammad led the example by marrying a 6-year-old but did not consummate until she was 9. That's me, by the way, in the picture. You're welcome to say how cute I am. Go ahead. Quran chapter 4, verse 34. Allah has made men superior to women because men spend their wealth to support them. Therefore, virtuous women are obedient, and they are to guard their unseen parts as Allah has guarded them. As for women who you will fear will rebel, admonish them first, and then send them to a separate bed and then beat them. But if they are obedient after that, then do nothing further. Surely Allah is exalted and great. It is halal to beat your wife. It's a matter of fact and part of the Sunnah and the Seerah that if anybody tells you is not actually part of Islam is lying to you, because all four schools of Sunni Islam say that the Sunnah and the Seerah from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim is 100% Islamic, and we must, Muslims must follow it. Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, the one who was 6 years old when he married it, had said she has not seen any women suffer as much as Muslim women. That was in an incident where a woman who, in her words, came to Muhammad begging for help from her husband, who literally turned her skin green from beating. Muhammad turned her around and sent her with her husband. Now this was me when I was wearing the hijab. I was about 15 years old here. O Prophet, in Quran chapter 33 verse 59, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to draw their cloaks all over their bodies. That will be better, that they should be known so as to not be harmed. And Allah, of course, is ever merciful and forgiving, and He's the best guy you could ever. Well, okay, I added that part. But this is what tells you that the hijab is a symbol that Muslim women wear in order to distinguish themselves from non-Muslim women so that they may not be harmed. Because it is haram, it is forbidden for Muslim men to sexually assault or rape Muslim women. However, it is not to do so to non-Muslim women. This is why we see these things happening in Europe, Minnesota, Michigan. And if you think it can't happen here, these are real pictures. Egypt, 1950, and Egypt today. Islam has a 1400-year history of going into places. It has absolutely nothing to do with American foreign policy. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who is my favorite president, fought Sharia with the Berber pirates. You can read about it. Now, of course, after reading all of this about Islam, I decided not to become a Muslim anymore, but I couldn't say anything because according to Sharia that I learned from studying, a Muslim, as Muhammad said, cannot be killed except for 3 instances. Adultery, of course, that's a Muslim having that kind of a relationship with a Muslim woman, not with a non-Muslim woman. Murder of a Muslim, so if a Muslim kills another Muslim. And apostasy, if a Muslim decides to leave Islam, it's an automatic death sentence. Well, I was 16 years old when my family and I moved back to the West. We moved to Canada. I reported my father to Children's Aid. We got out from under him. And so, like any other father, he went to his local mosque. And he got a fatwa, or a judgment, on our heads for leaving Islam. This is from a local mosque in Canada. So I was hungry to come back home. To come back to the States, I thought I'll be free. Nothing can harm me there. I'll be out of the reach of Islam. But unfortunately, when I got here, I found not only is the fox in the hen house, but the hens are apparently wearing hijabs and trying to make the fox as comfortable as possible. This is what happened in Iran. 1970s, today. That girl was shot for not wearing a hijab, point blank. This is America. On the left-hand side, you'll see Miss Phyllis Schlafly with her Great Women's Movement, dressed with class, fighting for what they believe in. On the right, or on the left-hand side, you'll see people like Linda Sarsour, who, by the way, is very involved in Michigan politics, and you might want to check out to see who she's endorsing. Follow the money trail. Follow the people who they're recommending. Vote your conscience, of course. Always be involved in your community. So this is what I found in my country. Here's what else I found. Every year, there are about 27 Muslim girls that get murdered in the United States for not following Sharia. These are just 4 of the young women that I wanted you to see. First is Tahani Mansour. Tahani Mansour was a pharmacist. She was shot in the head by her father while she was sleeping in her bed for having a messy room and for coming back home after her curfew. His wife, her mother, and her siblings stood by his side and said it was because of diabetes. So I don't know if you know any diabetic people, but apparently they can turn very dangerous. Noor al-Maliki was 19 years old. She was run over by her father for not wanting to wear hijab, for being too westernized, and so was her boyfriend's mother, as a matter of fact, because she left the house. Amina and Sara Sayed, beautiful young girls, were shot and killed in the back of a cab by their father. Again, too westernized. Too westernized means they don't want to wear the hijab. They want to have an opinion. They don't want to marry another man and be forced into marriage or sold into marriage. That's what too westernized mean. So when I was about 12 years old, I want to take it back a little bit, I actually had a dream. I saw a man's face and there was light coming out from behind him, and no matter what I did, I was physically moving, trying to get out from this light, and I couldn't get out of it. When I woke up, I told my dad, because in the Middle East, we take our dreams very seriously. It's something that's discussed almost on a daily basis. I told my dad, and he looked visibly agitated. And he said, well, you saw the Messiah for Christians, Isa, that's Jesus in Arabic. Of course, it's not the same Jesus. He says, that just means you're going to be a doctor in Islam. Mind you, I had already studied Islam at this point, and I knew that that was not true. So I didn't bring it up again. I did not accept Christ until I was about 26, 27 years old. And since then, he's put this on my heart, and he's told me very clearly to go wherever I'm asked and to share my story and to tell people the wonders that he has done in my life. And it is a wonder, because my story is not the normal story. It is the exception. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of girls like me, not just in the United States, but around the world, that don't have the chance to have freedom. And when we, as a society, consent to this, then this is a blemish that we are going to be so ashamed of for so long. Imagine, if you will, slaves coming off the plantation 100 years ago, going to other parts where there is no slavery and telling their story and warning people about slaveholders that are trying to take over and permit slavery in that place, and having people say, well, that's their culture. We need to accept that. We need to respect it. What do you think? That's the same thing we do when we say, that's Islamic culture, it's okay. I'm not going to ask any questions when my neighbor, who's a Muslim's daughter, goes missing all of a sudden and I haven't seen her for days. I'm not going to ask any questions when they're gone for a medical mission. Turns out they're in Michigan with their daughters undergoing female genital mutilation. I'm not going to ask when they say, oh, she moved to another state, and it turns out she actually got forced into marriage to another man. There was a young girl who was 16 years old in Texas recently, in the last couple of months, that was found. She ran away from home after her parents poured boiling oil on her for refusing to marry a man in the next county over after he paid $20,000 for her. So what I'm asking you to do today, I am asking you to please stand with me. Please be okay with being called a racist, a bigot, and a xenophobe. Join the club. Please be bold like Jesus did. Don't just hold on to turn the other cheek. Remember when he cracked the whip? That was also part of the Bible. Remember when he stood and he said, no, you're wrong. When he stood for the innocent, for the people that were getting persecuted. Stand up and tell Muslim girls that you are safe here. American rights are your rights. We will not discriminate against you because your parents have a certain religion or a certain doctrine or a certain culture. That today, America will once again stand to be free and will be the light of the world, in the world, and especially at home. Thank you, and God bless you, and God bless America. I have the privilege of introducing a woman who I couldn't have been friends with 20 years ago because she grew up Shia Muslim. And in fact, when I first met her, I said, wow, you're so pretty. I always thought that Shia were so scary. She's a freedom fighter and a personal friend. I think we're friends, right? Yeah. Miss Inez Annie Cyrus.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate that. My name is Inez Annie Cyrus. I'm a woman. I'm an Iranian by birth and a proud American. I'm a human rights activist. I'm an ex-Muslim. And most importantly, I'm a human. I was born in the Islamic Republic of Iran after the revolution when the country was 100% Sharia. By age 9, I was called a full adult woman under Sharia because the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, married a 6-year-old girl and consummated the marriage at age 9. And with that, every Muslim girl becomes a woman at age 9. The wife's name was Aisha. Look her up. You'll see all the stories. Considering I became a 9-year-old woman, I was responsible for my actions and I had to face consequences. With that, I managed to get myself arrested over 12 times and put in prison, lashed over 100 times, raped over I don't know how many times by the time I reached my 14. The crimes I committed were all crimes under Sharia, such as wearing nail polish, accidentally showing part of my hair from my hijab, attending a party where girls and boys were all in the same room, and also sitting in a front seat of a cab where I was just a passenger, but the driver decided to say we were having a relation. And under Sharia, because I, as a woman, consider half of a man, so did my testimony in court. The reason I am considered half of a man is because in Quran chapter 4, verse 11, Allah said, a woman is half of a man and deserves half of a man's rights. I was sentenced to 75 lashes because of that very testimony of mine that was not taken by the judge. My father was a sheikh, which is a step higher than imam, which is a man who can make ruling, Sharia ruling. By the time I almost got close to my 14, he decided that it's time for me to be somebody else's problem. So he decided to sell me to a man and in return receive $50, actual American dollars, and an opium usage for a month. I was handed over to the man and he had me for a year and a couple of months. During that time, if he wasn't beating me, he was raping me. And if he wasn't raping me, he was beating me. I tried to get a divorce. Under Sharia, as a woman, I do not hold the right to a divorce. I walked into a court one day after he was done beating me with a bloody lip, bruised face, and a dislocated shoulder. And I asked the judge to save me because this man is going to kill me one day. The judge looked me in the eye and calmly said, well, young lady, maybe if you start obeying your husband, he doesn't have to beat you. Now go home and make him happy. The only reason he did that is because in Quran chapter 4, verse 34 says, men are in charge of women. If you think your wife is going to disobey you, first warn her, then separate your bed, then beat her until she obeys you again. At age 15, that day in that court, I realized I am a hopeless, helpless teenager in my country, and one day I will be killed by my father or my husband or both, and no one's going to care. No one's going to even know. I managed to escape with the help of my grandmother, became a refugee, legally came to America, became a citizen, learned the culture as best as I could, and learned the language as best as I could. And then I started speaking out. Number one, because I know there are millions of anti-Cyruses left behind in Middle East who are dying or being raped or being mutilated daily, and nobody knows. So it's my duty as a human, as a survivor, to be their voice. Number two, I call America home today. And I am watching Islamization take place here in America every day. And my fellow Americans are not doing anything about it because they don't know anything about it. Because mainstream media is calling it an Asian culture. Because the left comes out and say they are just not being welcomed by us, so they snap. So it's my job to come out here and tell you that in Quran chapter 5, verse 51, Allah says, "Oh, you who have believed, do not take the Jews and Christians as your allies." It's my duty to tell you 91 verses in Quran tells Muslims that Muhammad is a perfect example of a man and you shall follow his footsteps. What did Muhammad do? Muhammad had 11 wives. Muhammad had a 6-year-old wife. Muhammad killed 800 Jews in one night. Muhammad killed every Christian he could get his hands on. And he's a perfect example to follow. Am I saying all Muslims are bad? No. Am I saying all Muslims are going to take every word of Allah and every step of Muhammad? No. But what we did for you today is, as you exit this building, we have a bowl of M&M outside, and about 5 or 6 of them in that bowl are poisonous. Please be my guest and help yourself. Islam isn't a culture. Islam is not a religion. Islam is not even an ideology. Islam is a death cult. As a Muslim, you will end up dead in Islam. You disrespect Muhammad, you're punished by death. You commit adultery, you're punished by death. You doubt Allah, you're punished by death. You're homosexual, you're punished by death. You breathe wrongly, you're punished by death. Now we have opened our doors to those who believe Muhammad, who praise Allah, and who believe, based on Quran, that the peace will not arrive upon them until every breathing human is a Muhammadian, being a... Those people will find a way to convert or kill as Muhammad did. They are committing jihad every day in this country. The problem is, the only thing mainstream media has taught Americans is jihad is when they blow themselves up. No. There are 4 different types of jihad under Sharia. One is the jihad that you kill yourself or you kill non-believers. The second form is the political jihad. A perfect example of it would be Hussein Obama, Keith Allison, many other names, and I believe somebody in possibility of coming in power here in Michigan. And then there is the financial jihad. Example of it, CARE, who is literally financing every single Muslim campaign who's running for office. And then we have the civilization or social jihad. All of your fellow, nice, convert, moderate, neighbor Muslims. Under Sharia, you are allowed as a Muslim to lie under 3 circumstances. It is called taqiyya, deceive. You can lie if you are going to save your life and you need to deny the fact that you are a Muslim and stay alive. Second reason you can lie is if your fellow Muslim brother, please keep in mind, brother is in danger and you want to save him, you can lie. reason, if you're helping for the agenda of Islamization, you can change the meaning of verses in Quran. You can easily say, I don't believe in Sharia, nor do I follow Sharia. You can go as far as saying, I'm not even a Muslim. With that tool given to Muslims, there is no way for any of you to know which one is here to kill you or which one is here not to kill you. And by the way, if my message right now is giving you fear, I'm not the one spreading the fear. I am literally just giving you facts about the so-called religion. So if it's fearful, it's the religion, not me. If it's hateful, it's the religion and not me. But the reality of it is, I came to this country when I was 18 years old, and the very first thing I did was walk away from the brainwashed system I was raised under. The first thing I did was I walked away from every single piece they shattered in me for being a woman under Sharia. I did my best to become an American. I did my best to stand here and say, I am a proud American, because I wanted to be a proud American. That's the only way that we can coexist. I'm not against immigration, no. If you're coming to this country to become one of us, be my guest. But if you're coming to this country to bring every disastrous part of your culture, then you can come to this country. It's not hate. It's the reality of human society. As humans, the only way we coexist if we have respect for our basic human rights. Under Sharia, a woman is nothing but a property. Under Sharia, a man is nothing but a slave to Allah. They go against basic human rights. So, since mainstream media isn't going to do it, it's our job, being ex-Muslims, to get out here, risk our lives. I'm sure you've noticed, we don't go anywhere alone. And that is just because Islam is extremely a peaceful religion. It's our job to come out here and tell you what we suffered from, what we survived, and what millions are suffering from. So you know what's coming, not for you, for the next generation, your daughters and your granddaughters. They will pay the price if you don't stand up. So what I'm asking you to do is please be Americans. That's all. Stand by our Constitution. Practice our laws. Practice your rights. Because that's all we need to do. If we stick with our Constitution, Sharia being a foreign law cannot be practiced in this country, bottom line. With that being said, thank you so much. God bless you and God bless America. And now it is my honor and privilege to welcome one of my personal heroes on the stage, Phil Haney.
Hello, everyone. Looking for the PowerPoint. I'm coming to you today as a retired founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to be talking to you as a law enforcement officer who took a vow to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic, and to uphold the Constitution. So the things that we've been talking about so far can be amended, remedied by the Constitution. but we have to follow it, don't we? And our elected officials have abrogated their duty to uphold the Constitution. And in fact, they not only merely passively abrogated their duty, they also came after people like myself who took our oath of office seriously, and under the previous administration literally rolled over us like the tank in Tiananmen Square without any regard to constitutional law or due process. And this is the message, the motto of the original motto of the Department of Homeland Security. You notice it talks about terrorism 3 times. We haven't heard a lot of emphasis on that lately, have we? More so lately than in at least the last 12 years. So there is reason for hope. This is in March of 2003. What are we now? 15 years in. This is the first time that I got in trouble, and that was for writing an open source article about a globally designated terrorist organization called Hamas, which means zeal in Arabic and violence in Hebrew. My own agency, along with the CIA, investigated me, accusing me of unauthorized use of classified information for simply writing an open source article about a globally designated terrorist organization as an officer within the Department of Homeland Security. No, it doesn't make any sense, does it? And here's where things began to really show. This is like a submarine coming up out of the water. This is when we began to be told that we're not allowed to use the language and the words that our very adversaries, globally and even domestically, use commonly every single day. They began to barricade us off from the language that we needed to accurately diagnose the problem. It's like a doctor who cannot say cancer, if you will. Not allowed to use those terms. This is January 2008. And then we come to the most significant turning point of the whole time that I would say since 9/11 till now, November of 2008, when 2 significant things happened. A new administration was elected, and the conclusion of the Holy Land Foundation trial that proved in federal court by the Department of Justice that these front groups like CARE that we've already been discussing earlier, and will more as I go forward. CARE is active in your state right now. They've even posted this event on their website. That they're irrefutably tied to Hamas, a globally designated terrorist organization. The very fact that they're still operating today is an affront. It's actually a constitutional obscenity, because they should have been shut down long ago. But the key point, friends, is that from this moment forward, when this trial was concluded in November of 2008, the U.S. government can no longer claim that it doesn't know. Flat out, period, irrefutable. The Department of Justice, the federal government laid it all out on the table. These groups are part of Hamas, period. There's no reason for them to even be in operation today. But this man, the big one in the picture, stood right next to the president not that long ago. And other members of his same organization, as you will see, have been invited into positions of influence within the executive branch of the government up until quite recently. And that, again, is something that's being amended. Here's where things really began to go badly sideways, like sliding on the ice. This is the Homeland Security Advisory Council, made up of at least 50% members of the Muslim Brotherhood, who I was simultaneously, by the way, tracking and putting what we call derogatory information into the classified law enforcement database at the very time that my own boss, Janet Napolitano, was inviting them into positions within the executive branch of the government in order for them to advise us how to do counterterrorism. Was it Annie that said the chickens? Or was it, yeah, those were the chickens, or the foxes that were coming into the chicken house. Here is an attempt by Peter King, who was at the time the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, to ask Eric Holder, Attorney General, why have you failed to continue forward in phase 2 of the Holy Land trial? This is now almost 3 years later, 2.5. He never got a response from the Obama administration, not even the courtesy of an explanation. That's how much obscene hubris we were seeing on full display. We don't have to explain anything to you. We don't have to uphold the law or the Constitution. Congress, tough. We're not explaining anything to you. Here's a symbol of the Muslim Brotherhood. I want you to just notice really quickly when you see the America go by, whether or not there's any exclusion zones to the image that this icon portrays. Do you see that we're excluded from it here in Michigan? So why don't we just be real simple, straightforward, and dispense with the ceremony and just take them at face value? Why not? Why 2 crossed swords? Did you see arrows in an olive branch? No, you're talking about enforcement and advancement, internally and externally. And that yellow Arabic word down in the bottom, wayayuda, means prepare. So what's the natural question? Prepare for what? How about to terrify your enemies and slaughter them? If that's a moderate organization, then please tell me, Mr. Clapper, who told the American people in open testimony that Muslim Brotherhood was a moderate organization. If this is moderate, what is radical? Here is the explanatory memorandum that Frank mentioned earlier. The word in the blue box says Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is not an organization over in Afghanistan somewhere. It's a concept. It means the observant Muslim base. We use it in politics to appeal to the base. The same concept in the global Islamic movement, only the base has a face to it. It often wears a hijab. And there's a new generation emerging right in the middle of our culture that is right now the active Al-Qaeda al-Islamiyya al-Mutsima, the observant or the obedient Muslim base. They are unifying, friends, right in front of us according to the doctrine of the explanatory memorandum, which was not written in Afghanistan or anywhere else in the Middle East. It was written by the Muslim Brotherhood right here in the United States before Osama bin Laden was ever heard of. Not there, here. This is the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, the most dangerous of all of the organizations in the Muslim Brotherhood solar system, because it is openly promoting Sharia right in front of us. The name in Arabic up at the top, it says Majama Fuqaha al-Sharia Be'amrikia, the group of lawyers promoting Sharia in America. It's unconstitutional. As our previous speaker said, the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution prohibits any other form of law. It's very, very straightforward. It's not complicated. Then there's this thing called the Great Purge that made it impossible for us to do our job as law enforcement. This was signed in November of 2011 by who else than John Brennan, whom you've been hearing a lot about lately because he's been tweeting out caustic criticism of President Trump. Well, guys like me that know who these people really are just makes us more adamant, bound, and determined to find a remedy to help protect our country from people like this. And look who signed it down in the bottom left corner, Farhana Kara, President and Executive Director of Muslim Advocates. This is the time of the Great Purge. It wasn't the first purge, but it was called the Great. The Great Purge the first purge was in 2009, when I was ordered by the Obama administration to delete the derogatory information out of more than 820 records, all having to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. And it blinded us, and it led directly to the Boston Marathon bombing. This is a thing called the hands-off. What I'm showing you is abrogations of duty, high crimes and misdemeanors by our officials in the administration who let people who were known terrorists come into the country and ordered people like me to DTR them. That means down the road. A guy named Jamal Badawi sued CBP twice, probably because we were trying to refuse entry, And he's one of what are called hands-off passengers nationwide. My own chain of command made a big mistake. We had tried to have him prevented from entry into the country, and they sent it right up to the top, clear up to Janet Napolitano level, but they forgot to take my name off the email string. And when they sent it out, it came right back down to me. And that's how I know this is true. I was working at the National Targeting Center in Washington on a big case, and this was something else I was doing at the same time. And by the way, these people in the circle, the one on the, let's see, would be the right, no, the left, the other right, is Jamal Badawi sitting right next to Khalid Mashal, the leader of Hamas, next to Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the sheikh of the Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood. And the guy on the other side is Salah Sultan, who is in prison right now for life for fomenting violence during the Arab Spring in Egypt. This is the kind of person that our administration let come into the country, despite all of our efforts. And immediately after that, we were told, sorry, I skipped one. Let me back up. This is an award that I won working on the Tablighi Jamaat case. And you'll notice within the red box, I was given specifically credit for finding 300 terrorists. When you compare that to the number of people who have done major level terrorist attacks in America since 9/11, which is what, 20 or 30 at the most, you're talking about 10 times more identified in just one case that I worked on, which was then subsequently shut down by the US government, specifically State Department with Hillary Clinton and DHS with Janet Napolitano. They morphed into one giant organization and worked with each other politically rather than in allowing us to do our job in the law enforcement arena. Here's another case that I worked on that was shut down by the government called the IIE, Institute of Islamic Education, which had a component of connecting dots, which we were told we didn't do when the underwear bomber came through, and or radicalization of Muslim Americans. I caught the first generation of naturalized or born Muslim kids going outbound to become imams in a Salafi madrasa in South Africa. And they literally deleted all of the information out of the law enforcement system by taking my Social Security, violating rules of security and protocol, and deleting the records. And then that wasn't enough. They investigated me for putting the information into the system in the first place. And this is what it looks like. And down at the bottom, you can't read it from back there, is one of the most tragic lines in my entire career. It says, I would like to discuss a way forward, either deleting these records out of text, that's our system, or transferring ownership to the NTC. What that means in everyday language is it wasn't even necessary for the government to delete the records. But they were so adamantly vindictive that they thought they could solve the problem of Officer Haney that without looking both ways, they deleted the records right out the system. And every time they deleted one, it came back to my email box. I have irrefutable proof that it happened. And yes, I kept it. And yes, I gave it to the US Congress. So what's the next question? If I already gave it to the people of authority, what's the natural next question? You guys are all catch on quick. So yes, this is the Boston bombing. I like this picture because of the first responders' response. Look how each one of the cops is looking in a different direction. This is a megasecond after it happened. And those deletion of records led directly to that. Then we find out, I won't read it all, but the Imam of the Islamic Society of Boston spilled the beans when he said that instead of being investigated by the federal government, they were doing outreach. With the very same mosque has about 45 members that had derogatory information, and about 15 or 20 organizations tied clear to Hamas and Al-Qaeda. They weren't investigating, they were doing outreach. You can imagine what it must have been like living in a world like this, where I'm putting information into the system and my own government is following me around as fast as they can, deleting it out. But that wasn't even enough. They investigated me for putting it in the first place and would have sent me to jail if they could have. They looked for probable cause to indict me on criminal charges, but they couldn't. This is right after the Boston bombing. Napolitano tells us now it is prohibited to even consider race or ethnicity in our investigations, which are weasel words for you're not allowed to investigate indicators among the Muslim population in America, period. You can't do it. If you do, you will be the one who will be investigated. And they followed through on that threat. You've seen this picture, right? If you had seen this man, Syed Farouk, on his passport, he looked like a kid that just graduated from high school. Now what does he look like? He just got off the plane from Pakistan. Wouldn't you think that in law enforcement it might be a fair thing to ask, Mr. Syed, what did you do between your passport picture and what you look at like now? But according to Janet Napolitano, we're not allowed to even ask those questions. And we would have lawsuits filed against us if we did. And a year later, after San Bernardino, they still couldn't figure out what was really happening. And no wonder, I don't blame them. Their own government deleted all the information out of the system in order to keep it that way. Here's the Pulse nightclub. It's part of the same network as the San Bernardino Mosque. Here's Omar Mateen's father, who we found out subsequently was on the FBI payroll as an informant. You think it's very likely the FBI is going to investigate his own mosque where his son went and try to connect the dots? No, it isn't. And here is Nihad Awad. You saw a picture of him earlier. The guy on the other side is Yasser Qadi. He is a branch of Islam closer to the Deobandi Tabligis. And then the woman on the left, I think you recognize her, don't you? He's Hamas, friends. And he represents the other branch of Salafi Islam, pro-Sharia, all the things that Annie and we're talking about. And here they are at the ISNA conference, the Islamic Society of North America, just a little while ago, not quite a year. And here is somebody else you recognize. What is this? You know, they say a picture tells 1,000 words. I really don't have to say anything, do I? And here is, in case you were wondering whether or not this policy is still in effect, yes, we're not completely washed of it yet. When Tillerson was Secretary of State, aside from his own personality, he didn't seem to realize that he was hosting people that were connected to Hamas. This is how saturated we have become. And this is Dawood Walid. He's the one that really spilled the beans and said that Muslims in Michigan are practicing Sharia right now. So if you think that what the girl said is only theoretical and it doesn't apply to you, well, you have to readjust your point of view, because CARE Executive Director Dawood Walid said plainly that Muslims in Michigan are practicing Sharia, which means what? That's unconstitutional, friends. Here's the Bridges program that Dick Manasari knows a lot about. The FBI is allowing people with CARE, despite the order or the prohibition against it, to come to these Bridges meetings, which, by the way, are only bridges one way. They're not a two-way bridge. And they're gripe sessions. They're not really constructive for law enforcement. Anyway, CARE and Muslim Brotherhood people go to these meetings. And here's Dawood Walid, who gets a lot of FaceTime in your state, who just managed to get a woman fired for simply tweeting something that Islam was not a peaceful religion. That's how bad it is, friends. You step out of line, they run you over. And here is just a couple days ago, the DOJ watchdog finds that FBI is unresponsive to homegrown threats because they're doing outreach, not law enforcement. You take Boston, you take San Bernardino, you take Orlando, you take Chattanooga, you take Fort Hood. It's like they wrote the same script. They follow the same script every single time. FBI needs to be restructured or retrained. But now you see the cataclysmic damage that was done clear back in 2008, 10 years ago, when they took the capacity for law enforcement to even describe the threat accurately. And that has brought us to where we are. If I have anything to do with it, friends, I intend to help find a remedy. That's what I'm here for. And thank you very much for your attention. Now we have Pastor McKay, who is going to summarize with some biblical perspective as a pastor, meaning a shepherd who has responsibility, regardless of whether it's popular or otherwise, to discern the times and shine a light into the darkness.
Hasn't this been great this afternoon? Folks, everything that you have heard can you hear me? Everything that you have heard this afternoon is absolutely true. Unfortunately, your average American today is clueless about what you have heard this afternoon. Your average American today is clueless, first of all, about the true nature of the Islamic faith. They're clueless about the fact that Islam is not like Buddhism or Hinduism or Mormonism or Christianity. Islam is vicious and oppressive. Oh, come on, Pastor Don. There are moderate Muslims out there. No, there are not. Not one exists. Not one exists. Not one. You cannot find a moderate Muslim on the face of the planet. Let me elaborate on that. Are there individuals today who claim to be Muslims who have no more interest in jihad than you or I? Of course. Individuals who may go to the mosque once a year. There are secular Muslims out there today. There are cultural Muslims, but they're not true Muslims. There are not 5 pillars in the Islamic faith. There's not just the confession, shahada, prayer, salat, fasting, during the month of Ramadan, tithing, and the Hajj. There is a 6th pillar, the hidden pillar. Now, if I claim to be a Christian and I deny one of the cardinal verities of the Christian faith, if I claim to be a Christian and I deny the resurrection or the deity of Christ, I can claim to be a Christian till I'm blue in the face. I'm not a Christian. There is not one true moderate Muslim on the face of the planet today. Not one. Most Americans today are clueless about the true nature of the Islamic faith. They're clueless about the goal of Islam. The goal of Islam is to overthrow the Constitution. The goal of Islam is to establish a caliphate in Washington, D.C. Are you serious? You've heard it this afternoon. Folks, this is not a game. This is reality. Most Americans are clueless about the true nature of the Islamic faith. They're clueless about the goal of Islam. They're clueless about the strategy of Islam, which is multifaceted. Muslims come into a Western democracy, and it's immigration, it's reproduction. They're out producing a son. It's evangelization. It's political domination. Do you know that there are 90 Muslim individuals running for political office in the United States today? 90 Muslims running for political office with the goal of gaining political control, including an individual who is running for governor here in the state of Michigan, who's Sharia compliant. And then the strategy is also has already been talked about this afternoon, taqiyya, the doctrine of lying. Muslims are not just encouraged, but mandated to lie in order to advance the faith. They are mandated to lie. Well, I have no desire whatsoever to overthrow the Constitution. I'm interested in integration, not domination, not political domination, but I'm interested in integration. That's a lie. I have no interest in jihad whatsoever. That jihadic activity that took place, those individuals aren't true Muslims. They've hijacked my faith. That's a lie. Folks, this is a problem. Your average American today is clueless and critical of individuals like us, even some Christian people. You're too hard on them, Pastor Don. Now, that's a problem, but the problem is compounded by the fact that those who understand the true nature of the Islamic faith may soon lose the freedom to speak about the things that we've been speaking about this afternoon. You know, in 2016, the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa passed a motion condemning all forms of Islamophobia. In 2016, the government of Canada passed a motion condemning all forms of Islamophobia. What does that mean? I'm not really sure what that means. It's sort of a nebulous concept. Islamophobia. We condemn Islamophobia. Well, are you going to define that? No. We're not going to define that so we can be brutal when it comes to imposing that restriction. We frankly want this to be very loose-ended, so we can be very brutal when it comes to imposing that restriction. How many of you know what is happening in Great Britain today? Tommy Robinson. Tommy has enough intestinal fortitude, enough guts to speak out against Sharia-compliant rape. This is the land of Churchill. This is the land of Thatcher. Guess where Tommy Robinson is today for speaking out against Sharia-compliant rape? He's in prison today. In Great Britain, folks, this is coming our way. Something wicked this way comes. You know, today in America, you can say anything you want negatively about Christianity. I mean, Christians are fair game. You can say anything negative about Christians, anything you want. But you better be very careful about saying anything negative about Islam, about Muslims. That's politically incorrect today, and very soon it may be punishable by jail time. Folks, I'm not exaggerating the situation here. Philip, I thought, was fantastic today. I mean, he's laying it out. Farah laid it out. I mean, we're laying out reality here. Are some positive things happening under Donald Trump? Some positive things. Some positive things. We're facing, however, a tidal wave. We're facing enormous challenges, generally speaking, when it comes to the insinuation of Islam into our political system, into our culture, into our very way of life here in the United States of America. We're facing a tidal wave. Now, I have been authorized to speak about what are we to do about this? What are we to do about, you know, we've talked about the elimination of free speech when it comes to Islam. That's nothing other than Sharia creep. It's happening today. So what are we to do about Islam in America and Sharia creep? Well, let me just share with you some things that I think need to be done. Number one, We need to pray. I am a Christian. I have come to grips with the greatest message that anybody could ever come to grips with, which is the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian, so I believe in the power of prayer, and I believe that we do need to pray that God would sovereignly thwart the insinuation of Islam in American society, when it comes to our culture, when it comes to our political system, when it comes to our educational system. We need to be praying. We also need to be proclaiming. We've talked about the fact that the average American is clueless about what is really happening today in this great country of ours. You can help when it comes to that. You can help. How many of you are concerned about your children and grandchildren? How many of you want to lose your country? This is the trajectory that we are on. This is not an exaggeration, folks. Do you want to lose your country? Then we need to speak up. In spite of the fact that people may oppose us speaking up, we need to speak up. What else do we need to do? We need to elect officials today, political officials, who understand the true nature of the Islamic faith, the insinuation of Islam in America today, and who are prepared to guard our First Amendment rights. We need to elect officials like that, which means we need to be aware of who is running and what their stances are. We need to be acutely aware of these things. Finally, I want to close with this. We need to love Muslim people. Folks, we do not hate Muslim people. We hate their, as was stated earlier, their death cult, which is exactly what it, can you imagine? The penalty for apostasy in Islam today is death. You got a fatwa on your head if you decide to become a Christian. You've got a fatwa, death sentence. Women are considered to be half of what a man is. Men are mandated to beat their wives. This is true Islam. This is true Islam. We hate their death cult, their ideology, but we love them. You know, Patrick Colbeck was... Patrick Colbeck, who I have unbelievably great appreciation for. This is a man who's got some guts, who's got some courage. You know, where are the Churchills today? Churchill says, you don't capitulate, you resist, you resist, you resist. Patrick Colbeck was in a debate with Abdul, who is a committed Muslim, running for governor of Michigan. He is a committed Muslim. And Patrick Colbeck very graciously said, we don't hate Muslims. We love Muslims. And Abdul responded, you may not hate Muslims, but they hate you. Folks, be that as it may, Abdul can say to my face, I hate you, McKay. Abdul, you can cut me into 1,000 pieces, and every piece will say, I love you. Abdul, you can cut me into 1,000 pieces, and every piece will say, I love you. We do not hate Muslims. We hate their ideology. We hate their death cult. But we love them, and we want them to come to grips with the greatest message that anybody could ever come to grips with, which is the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which says a rotten sinner like McKay can go to heaven through simple faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. We want to thank you for being here this afternoon, and we want to thank those of you who have joined us by webinar. This is going to conclude the webinar portion of the program, but what is going to happen, we're going to have a little bit of a break, a time for refreshments, and then we're going to come back and have a question and answer session. So those of you who have to leave, you have to leave, but if you can possibly stay for the question and answer session, I know that that will be meaningful for you. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Oh, one other remark. If you would like more information about upcoming seminars, there is a table in the back with cards. Please fill out a card with your email on it. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.